Welcome to Whispers at Night. Can't sleep? Curl up and listen. I'll share quiet, eerie stories while the rain falls out into your window. Subscribe. Join our little night crew and hit like if you enjoy the chill. Ready? Let's begin. Marissa Cole had been collecting old Halloween pieces for years, when on Saturday, September 15th, 2007, she pulled off Washington's Highway 9 for an estate sale. The split level looked trapped in the 1960s. Aluminum awnings, pink brick, a juniper hedge cut into cubes. Inside, the air smelled like old wool and lemon oil. She asked the coordinator if there were any Halloween items. "Downstairs," the woman said, and led her into a basement where a single bare bulb swung over concrete and metal shelves bowed under boxes. Marissa opened tins and cartons the way she always did. Slow, careful hands, eyes trained to spot treasure. Plastic skull buckets from the 1980s, crepe paper witches from the 1950s, 2 tin noisemakers stamped 1941. Then the coordinator pointed to the back near the furnace. "There's a costume hanging there." The suit stopped Marissa in her tracks. Red and black diamonds, aged silk, hand-stitched seams so fine they were almost invisible. A one-piece Harlequin, top and trousers joined, narrow at the waist, paired with a separate collar hung with 3 tarnished bells. And the mask, porcelain, crazed with fine cracks, a long fracture from temple to jaw. The painted smile stretched too wide. The black diamonds around the eyes sat a little crooked. The eye holes were off, not where a normal person's eyes would be. "Who owned this?" Marissa asked. "Man who lived here," the coordinator said. "Died June 2nd, no family. We're under orders to sell everything. How much?" The woman shrugged. "40. Marissa paid cash before the price could change. As she lifted the costume from the pipe, her ears popped, as if the pressure shifted for half a second. She told herself it was the furnace cycling on. She laid the suit carefully across her back seat and drove home. 3 times she glanced in the mirror and thought the costume had settled in a new shape, just a little, like a sleeper rolling over. She told herself the road was rutted and kept driving. In her finished basement, she set a dressmaker's mannequin in the corner and slid the silk over it. The fabric moved too easily, like it already knew the path. The collar bells chimed once, faintly. She eased the mask onto the dummy's head and stepped back. The room felt smaller, like the corners had leaned in. When her husband Evan came down the stairs, he froze 2 steps from the bottom. "I don't like that," he said. "I don't like it in our house." "It's just a costume," she said. "Then why does it feel like it's watching me?" She laughed because that was easier than answering. After he went back up, she stood alone and felt just for a blink the same thing. The little things started that week. She would pose the mannequin's arms the way a 1920s postcard showed. Right hand lifted, left hand at the hip, and come back to find the right wrist turned toward the door. She would straighten the mask and later find it tilted left. The thermometer she kept to protect old paper decorations held steady at 65, unless she stood near the Harlequin, when it dropped 5 or 6 degrees. The cat Nim stopped at the threshold with her fur up, hissing at the corner. The dreams began on Thursday, September 27th. In them, she watched herself sleep from across the room, at a height too high to be a person's eye level. She could not move. She could only watch her own chest rise and fall. A whisper slid by her ear, thin and papery, full of soft S sounds and long vowels she didn't recognize. She woke at 2:46 a.m., with the taste of old coins in her mouth. Her friend Tasha planned a vintage horror party for Halloween and begged Marissa to wear the Harlequin. Evan said, "Please don't." He rarely said please like that. "I mean it," he added. "Don't wear it." On October 31st at 7:10 p.m., Marissa laid the suit on the bed. Up close, she noticed brown-yellow stains on the glove fingertips and the leather worn thin there, like someone had gripped something hard over and over. She told herself it was stage makeup. She stepped into the silk. It was cold, then not. It tightened around her like something satisfied. The gloves sealed at her wrists. She lifted the mask. The eye holes weren't right. When she pressed it to her face, the porcelain warmed and seemed to soften. For one long second, she couldn't breathe. Then she could. She could see just fine. In the mirror, for a heartbeat, a gaunt man stared back at her. Parchment skin, hollow cheeks, a smile that belonged on woodcut devils. She blinked and it was only her wearing the mask. Evan stepped in the doorway and went pale. "Your eyes look wrong," he said, though the porcelain should have hidden them. He couldn't explain what he meant. She left at 7:42. Driving felt off by a degree. The gloved fingers on the wheel looked too long. Twice she had the dream feeling, watching herself from behind, like she was in the back of her own head. Tasha's living room filled with costumes and laughter. People praised the suit and kept a polite distance. No one touched the fabric even when she offered. "Too real," someone said. Marissa laughed, but it came out a hair too high, lasted a beat too long. She found herself unmoving in a corner, staring at a man across the room. She didn't remember walking there. Tasha's kids were supposed to be asleep, but they sat 2 steps from the top of the staircase, wide-eyed. Marissa became aware of them and turned her head. The little boy grabbed his sister's wrist. Marissa's legs took her to the bottom of the stairs. She wanted to speak and couldn't. She stood and watched them like a display. "Marissa?" Tasha called once, twice, 3 times. On the third, Marissa turned and Tasha flinched. Later she said it felt like her friend wasn't inside the mask anymore. A man dressed as a vampire joked, "Clowns are worse than anything." Marissa's head snapped toward him with a sharp, wrong angle. People gasped. Her body moved. She didn't tell it to. Her gloved hands closed around the man's throat. He clawed at her wrists. The pressure she applied felt deliberate, thumbs adjusting, forearms turning, like following a teacher's hands. The mask hummed faintly against her cheekbones with a pleased vibration. A whisper, not in English, stroked her ear. "Now, here, hold." 4 guests dragged her off. She thrashed with a strength she didn't own. The man lay on the rug gagging, purple hand-shaped marks rising on his neck. Someone snapped a photo for proof and later stared at the spacing. The fingers too long and narrow to match Marissa's hands. Several guests swore she spoke while she strangled him. It wasn't English. A linguistics professor said it sounded like mangled Latin mixed with Old German. Another guest whispered she heard Marissa speak in her dead mother's voice and use a childhood nickname no one else knew. Inside the mask, Marissa screamed and heard herself not at all. The whisper purred, "Shift, stop." Evan arrived at 8:58 after frantic calls. Marissa lay twitching on the floor. People stood in a wide circle as if distance were protection. He knelt, hooked his fingers under the mask's edge, and pulled. The porcelain wouldn't lift. It felt fused. He shoved his fingers deeper and wrenched. When it came free, the scream had 2 notes like 2 strings vibrating together. She vomited and blacked out. She woke in the car at 9:31. Evan drove fast and tight-lipped. She pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes and asked what she'd done. He told her. She cried in small, contained sounds. In the bathroom mirror, raised welts traced every place the mask had touched. Cheeks, brow, chin, jaw. The pattern wasn't random. Evan took photos. A friend who taught history looked the next day and said the thin white lines, when the swelling settled, read like names and dates in old script. Ottilie, 1892. Fanzialdi 94. G. Wiki, 1898. Others were too cramped to sound out. Tasha called the morning of November word. "The costume is still here," she said. It moved. After everyone left, she'd returned to tidy up. The Harlequin lay where Evan had dropped it. Then as she watched, it shifted, just a little, like something inside the fabric rolled. Marissa needed the story. Public records showed the estate house had belonged to the Whitlock family since May 3rd, 1892. The first owner, Thomas Whitlock, performed with a traveling show that played county fairs from Spokane to New Bremen, Ohio. In the library's digitized archive, she found an October 21st, 1894 clipping. Whitlock the Harlequin startles crowd. Another, December 12th, 1894, child collapses on stage. The coroner wrote heart failure. Witnesses said, Whitlock touched the boy's face and the child went still as a stopped clock. After that, Whitlock vanished from the news. No death certificate, no burial record. The suit, though, stayed with the family. A penciled warning in a Bible flyleaf, scanned on a genealogy forum, read, "Do not wear the suit. All Hallows 1903, Henry. All Hallows 1931, C.S. All Hallows 1968, B. Whitlock." They tried to destroy it on Saturday, November 3rd. In the backyard fire pit, Evan soaked the silk with lighter fluid. The match flame touched fabric and died. Heavy shears skated off like the costume was shadow. A work knife snapped. On Monday, November 5th, he fed a sleeve into an industrial shredder at his warehouse. The machine screamed, threw sparks, and stopped. The sleeve came back out whole. So, late that night, they drove into the state forest with a spade. They dug 6 feet, dropped the costume in, watched the bells settle, shoveled the dirt, tamped scattered leaves, and went home without talking. On Thursday the 8th, Marissa opened the garage to get potting soil. The Harlequin hung from a rafter by its collar, mask turned toward the door. Evan checked doors and windows, locked. In the damp earth outside, no prints. At the burial site, undisturbed soil and deer tracks. They rented a climate-controlled storage unit and slid a fireproof safe into Unit B17 on Saturday, November 10th. The facility manager, a polite man with a key ring like a wind chime, helped push the dolly. "Colder on this row," he remarked as if it were trivia. 3:34 p.m. the safe door shut. Marissa thought she heard the faintest bell. She locked the unit and drove away. The welts faded by Thanksgiving. The scars that remained were hair-thin and pale. In December, the lines seemed to shift. Ottilie thinned. Franz rose. "Dermatologists said scars don't move?" Marissa nodded and did not argue. The dreams returned on Saturday, January 19th, 2008. She drifted 6 feet high through her dark house, past the glow of the fridge down the hall, watching Evan's chest rise and fall. In the glass of a framed photo she saw, reflected beside her, the oval of white porcelain. She woke with the taste of coins again. On February 3rd, she stopped by the storage unit to convince herself the safe was shut. The keypad clicked. The door rolled up. Frost feathers curled around the safe handle. She pressed a palm to the metal and yanked back when cold burned her skin. She did not turn the wheel. She lowered the door. In the car, she shook for 10 minutes and told herself it was just adrenaline. A letter arrived on February 7th with no return address. Inside, a sepia photograph. A gas-lit stage, a man in a diamond suit. Scrawled on the border, Otto Drexler, New Bremen Fair, October 1893. On the back, in another hand, "You are holding what belongs to the show." She touched a match to the corner. The flame ran and went out. She slid the photo into a zip bag and hid it in the freezer. At the university archive, an old letter from a seamstress named Hedda Volz to her sister. Dated October 30th, 1894. "I finished the Harlequin. He paid in coins so cold I thought them dug from ground. He marked where the eye holes must sit and told me to stitch the collar inside the neck tight. It must choke," he said, "or it won't work." In March, the linguistics professor sipped coffee in Marissa's kitchen and listened to a recording Tasha's husband had captured, the seconds before the guests pulled Marissa off. "Mostly nonsense," the professor said, "but I hear ligare to bind, and calare to call, and something like Hallow Eve in a Swabian lilt." In April, a backhoe replaced a sewer line behind their fence. The operator knocked to say gently, he thought they'd hit their cat. Nim slipped between Marissa's ankles just then, alive and annoyed. Behind the man, something white glinted at the trench edge like porcelain, and then wasn't there when she looked again. In August, the storage manager called. The HVAC tech said their row was 5 degrees colder. "Can we open and check the seals?" he asked. "No," Marissa said too fast. She drove over at lunch. He walked the aisle with her. "Heard bells last week," he said with a laugh he didn't finish. She cracked the safe and closed it, not breathing for the second the door was open. A smell like old perfume and damp paper drifted out. She tells herself she'll never wear the suit again. She means it. She also knows exactly how it felt not to be the one deciding. How the body moved like it had been shown a simpler way to live. Still, certain, powerful. On some nights that memory hums under her ribs like a tuning fork. Halloween comes the way it always does, by degrees you don't notice until the leaves turn. The scars heat a little when the air changes. She keeps an ice pack ready and her keys in a bowl by the door. She avoids mirrors after 10. On October 30th, 2008, just before midnight, she dreams she is 6 feet high in the storage aisle. She slides to B17 and watches her own hands turn the wheel. The hinge sighs. Cold flows. She wakes with her heart hammering and the coin taste on her tongue. The clock reads 12 a.m., October 31st. The house is quiet except for the heater ticking and Nim's little bell as the cat jumps to the windowsill. Downstairs on her desk is a postcard she hasn't framed yet. 1910. A pumpkin-headed gentleman tips his hat to a girl with a lantern. Along the bottom, Halloween greetings. Beware the mask you wear. She keeps it face down now. Sometimes she imagines renting a boat and pushing the safe over the side past the shelf and listening for the bells as it falls. Sometimes she composes an email to a museum. I have a thing that shouldn't be touched. Sometimes she thinks about finding Whitlock's grave, if it exists, and laying the silk in the dirt with a cedar bough and a name said out loud. Every time she decides on one plan, a small tug pulls in the other direction. It isn't strong. It doesn't have to be. The storage manager makes his last rounds at 11, humming, keys chiming. He doesn't notice the breath of cold outside B17 or the frost on the handle. He locks up and drives home. The camera over the aisle records everything. At 2:46 a.m., the feed jumps a fraction of a second and returns. If you frame through it, you could swear the unit door sits half an inch farther open than before. Or you could blame compression and sleep fine. Marissa pays the storage bill on the 1st of each month. She sets reminders for September 15th, June 2nd, October 31st. She sometimes stands at the basement doorway and studies the empty corner where the mannequin once stood, and waits to feel watched. When she does, she closes the door and sits on the top stair until her pulse slows. On a few nights only, she misses the quiet the mask gave her. She tells herself she is not going to the unit. She says it out loud. The words help. The words are not a lock. Objects can wait longer than people. Behind a numbered door and a heavy wheel, something that knows the exact measure of her breath and the shape of her face is patient, does not hurry. It does not change. It waits for the right night and the right person to open a door. Detective Cal Maddox had worked missing persons long enough to know how Halloween goes. Phones light up, kids run late, teens go off the grid on purpose. Most of it sorts itself out by midnight. A dad finds his daughter at a neighbor's house. A boy's phone died and he walks in the door holding a pillowcase of candy. You breathe again. You move on. On October 31st, 2021, the call at 9:47 p.m. wasn't like that. The mother's voice wasn't frantic. It was hollow, like something had been scooped out of her. The house took her, she told the dispatcher. The house on Ashbinder Court took my little girl. Cal pulled onto the cul-de-sac 15 minutes later. Ashbinder Court was one of those old neighborhoods. Big trees, big porches, long shadows. The missing child was Noor Alvarez, 8 years old. Her brother, Leo, 12, told Cal they were working their way down the circle. Noor saw the last house, the one with the fog machine and full-size candy bars, and sprinted ahead. Leo bent down to tie his sneaker. Maybe 10 seconds. When he looked up, Noor was gone. Cal walked it himself. The crack in the sidewalk where a root had lifted the concrete, the dip in the grass near the last mailbox, the angle of the porch to the streetlight. The house at the end was a dark Victorian trimmed neat as a picture. Fake webs draped the railing. A pair of animatronic mourners rocked slow in the windows. Fog crawled across the lawn. It didn't look fun. It looked like a shrine. The porch light was on. Through the front window, Cal could see a glass bowl the size of a punch basin, heavy with candy bars. Someone was home. He knocked. The door opened almost at once, like the man had been standing behind it. Late 60s, tidy hair, wool cardigan. He smiled as if he'd been expecting a guest. "Evening," the man said. "I'm Lionel Greaves. Come in, please. You're welcome to look anywhere." Greaves was beyond cooperative. He stepped aside. He offered the basement first. He moved with that soft, careful gait of a man who had never once in his life bumped an end table. Cal and 2 uniforms went through the place top to bottom. First floor, clean, old furniture, nothing expensive, nothing out of place. Kitchen counters wiped down to a dull shine. Second floor, 3 bedrooms. One made up like a guest room no one ever used. One with a sewing table, one with a perfectly smoothed bedspread and a single book on the nightstand. Basement, paneled walls, tired carpet, air colder than it should be. A small workbench with a vise. Shelves lined with labeled tubs, winter lights, old photographs, blankets. Detached garage, one car, tools hung in size order. A lawnmower wiped free of clippings. Yard, nothing but grass and mulch. No scuff marks. No candy trail, nothing. Greaves's alibi was neat too. He'd been on the porch since 6 sharp, he said. He kept a notebook on a little stand by the door. Each group counted, each refill time logged. Dozens of neighbors saw him out there. He stepped inside only long enough to top up the bowl. The times in his neat round handwriting matched what people on the block said. There was no obvious chance for him to have grabbed a child without someone else seeing. Still, Cal's skin crawled. It wasn't evidence. It was instinct. The way Greaves kept smiling while they searched for an 8-year-old. The way his eyes stayed bright and flat, as if none of this landed on him at all. Back at his desk, Cal ran the address. A yellow flag popped up before the printout even finished. 3 prior Halloween disappearances within 200 yards of the same house. In 1992, a 7-year-old boy named Victor Long. In 2001, a 9-year-old girl named Maylin Park. In 2009, an 8-year-old boy named Jerome Tully, all on Halloween night, all last seen within sight of that porch. None ever found. Cal pulled the old files. The notes were careful, the timelines tight. In each case, the child was with someone, a sibling, a cousin, a friend, and vanished in seconds. One glance away, one knot in a shoelace. Poof. The parents in each file used similar phrases without knowing the others had said them. Trusting, friendly, not afraid to talk to adults. It fit Noor too. Property records put Lionel Greaves in that house since 1989. He'd been there for all 4. Cal and his partner, Detective Priya Ligari, went back the next day. They asked Greaves about the old cases. He said they were tragedies. He said the neighborhood still held sorrow. He said he'd considered moving, but the house had been good to him. When Cal pointed at the pattern, 4 kids in 29 years, all on Halloween, all within view of his porch, Greaves shrugged. Coincidence, he said. Lots of kids on this street. More kids, more incidents. He repeated that he'd been on his porch every time. They checked. Neighbors swore to it. Mr. Greaves? He's out there handing out candy all night, a father said. Every year. Never seen him leave the steps. The timeline in each cold case bent around that porch like iron. Cal didn't let it go. He started driving past after shift and again before dawn. From a block away, he watched Greaves' garden under floodlights at 1 in the morning, trowel flicking neat half-moons into the soil. He watched delivery drivers set heavy boxes on the porch and step back as Greaves signed, then scurried the boxes inside alone. No one else ever crossed the threshold. Greaves's house had odd details, you noticed, only if you looked long enough. Small vents cut into the foundation where there shouldn't be any. Slim exhaust fans tucked beneath the eaves. Too much air moving for a house that size. Cal pulled permit records. In 1991, Greaves had repaired the basement walls. The note was vague and the inspection stamp missing. Back then, some structural work slipped through without formal permits. 2 years before the first disappearance, no complaint, no violation, no way to leverage it for a new warrant. 3 weeks after Noor vanished, Cal got a call from a blocked number. The woman on the line refused to give her name. She would meet him in a coffee shop 3 towns over. She sat small at a corner table, a thin woman in her 80s, gray hair pinned back, hands that trembled but didn't spill the tea she stirred. I lived next door to him for 37 years, she said. I kept journals. It's what I did at the library. Write things down. She slid a spiral-bound notebook across the table. The entry for November 1st, 1992 said, saw small shape at basement window of 17 Ashbinder around midnight. Too short to be Lionel. Moved back and forth twice. The entry for November 2nd, 2001. Child's voice, girl, faint, help, direction of 17, called police. Officer came, spoke to Lionel. Officer told me I was mistaken. She had more entries, each with dates and times. She had called again in 2009. The responding officer noted elderly neighbor, likely confused. After that, she stopped calling. She kept writing. It wasn't evidence a judge would love. It was something Cal couldn't shake. As the next Halloween crept closer, Cal made a reckless choice he knew might end his career. He asked his sister if he could take his 9-year-old nephew, Gabe, trick-or-treating. Gabe was small for his age and trusting, the kind of kid who would tell a stranger his favorite dinosaur without being asked. Cal sewed a tiny camera into the brim of Gabe's cap and clipped a mic under his collar. He parked down the block with a clean line to Greaves's porch. Gabe climbed the steps like any kid would. Careful, excited, proud of his costume. Greaves opened the door with that same practiced smile. He praised the costume. He dropped a king-size bar into the bucket. He asked how many houses were left. He glanced once toward the living room, where the candy bowl waited on a side table. Gabe thanked him and turned away. Nothing happened. The video showed a polite old man. The mic caught nothing but small talk and the rustle of wrappers. Priya found out and reported Cal to the lieutenant. 2-week suspension without pay. One more stunt, they said, and he was done. Cal's sister didn't speak to him for a month. He couldn't argue. He'd gambled with his nephew and lost nothing but trust. A week after he returned, his phone buzzed at 2:11 a.m. Block number again. "Detective Maddox," Greaves's voice said, warm as a sweater. "Come by. We should clear the air." Cal told Priya where he was going and wore a wire under his shirt. Greaves sat on the porch despite the cold, cardigan buttoned to his throat. He had 2 chairs set. "Sit," he said, like a host offering coffee. "I know what you think," Greaves said when Cal didn't take the cup. "You won't prove it. You won't find what you want. I've been doing this longer than you've been shaving." "Doing what?" Cal asked. "Welcoming," Greaves said and smiled. "They come because they want to. They like the lights. They like the candy. They ask what's inside. And once a child steps across a threshold willingly, detective, that's a kind of promise." "Promises have power," Cal's stomach lurched. He reached to check the recorder. The screen was dead. He'd charged it before he left. He'd checked it in the car. Now it showed nothing. Greaves chuckled, not unkindly. "Even your gadgets know whose house this is," he said. "This house takes care of its own." Cal sat in his car afterward with his gun on his thigh and stared at the front steps. If he went back up and fired 2 rounds center mass, he could end Greaves. He could say Greaves lunged. He could tell himself it would stop something. He could also be wrong. Killing Lionel Greaves wouldn't bring Noor home. Might not stop whatever else used that porch. Cal called the FBI cold case unit in the morning and handed them everything. An agent came down. She interviewed Greaves. She reviewed the files. She closed her notebook and said the thing Cal already knew. There wasn't enough for federal charges. Not yet, maybe not ever. On October 31st, 2022, just before 10, a new call came in. 6-year-old named Diego Fuentes disappeared on Ashbinder Court at 9:52 p.m. Cal sprinted to Greaves's porch. Greaves sat where he always sat. Parents nodded. "We saw him." He never left. He smiled at Cal, the same small smile he'd used when he offered the cup. The judge signed a warrant based on the new disappearance and the pattern. For 3 days, Cal and a team peeled Greaves's house like an onion. Carpet up, baseboards off. Outlet covers removed, drains checked. The paneling came down. The crawl space crumbled in their hands. Cadaver dogs swept the lot in grids. Ground-penetrating radar traced the lawn and the flower beds. They found clean earth and old plumbing and 3 lost marbles under a dresser. No bodies, no hair, no traces. The only blood in the place belonged to Greaves from a razor nick on a towel. 2 years later, Greaves died in his sleep. 71. Heart. The house went to auction. Cal drained his retirement and bought it. He turned in his badge. For 6 months, he did nothing but take the place apart. He pulled down every bit of wallpaper. He lifted every floorboard and checked the joists. He broke the basement slab into hand-carryable squares and hauled them out himself, pallet by pallet. He sifted dirt through a screen he built from 2 Quoke 4s and wire mesh. He found buttons, nails, pennies black with age, a sheriff's campaign pin from 1980, 3 teeth from a squirrel, and a single little plastic ring from a gumball machine. He did not find Noor Alvarez or Victor Long or Maylin Park or Jerome Tully or Diego Fuentes. He had the house condemned and demolished. The lot turned into a rectangle of grass. Nobody wanted to build there. People said it was the taxes. People said it was the market. People said nothing and drove on. Every Halloween, Cal stands on that grass from dusk until after 10. Sometimes the evening passes quiet. Sometimes he hears laughter with no location, like a sound coming up through soil. If a call goes out, the radio blurts missing juvenile. He starts walking before the street name finishes. He keeps a county map on the wall of the spare bedroom that used to be an office. Red pins mark every child who vanished on Halloween for 40+ years. At first, the pins cluster tight around Ashbinder Court. Then they begin to drift outward along the neighborhood streets, then to the next subdivision, then to the edge of town. It doesn't explode outward. It creeps like ivy. The pattern is slow and patient and alive. People ask him why he spent his savings on a house he tore down. He says he couldn't stand to watch one more child climb those steps. It's true. It's not the whole truth. The whole truth is this. He hoped if he took away the porch and the light and the bowl by the window, whatever used them would lose its grip. If the house was a mouth, he wanted to break the teeth it didn't stop. The year after the demolition, a girl vanished 2 streets over at 949. The next year, a boy disappeared on a road half a mile away at 946. In both cases, an adult was right there. In both cases, the child ran a few steps ahead toward a porch with a bright bulb and a generous bowl, and a welcome you could feel through glass. In both cases, there was no evidence a stranger laid a hand on them. They were there, then they weren't. Cal thinks about Greaves's word, threshold, a line you choose to cross, a door you step through because a light was on and someone smiled. He thinks about how many times a child is told to be polite, to say please and thank you, to step forward and accept a gift from a friendly hand. He thinks about promises, the way some old stories talk about agreements you make without knowing. He doesn't say any of that out loud. It sounds like madness. He keeps his thoughts simple when people ask. He says, stay with your kid. Don't let them go up alone. Don't let them step inside anyone's house for any reason. Not even to pick your favorite. He hands out glow sticks and prints the rules on a single sheet because people listen better when the font is big. He goes to see Noor's mother on the last Sunday of every October. They sit at her small table with a candle burning and talk about things that have nothing to do with Halloween until they do. He doesn't promise anything. He can't. He says Noor's name out loud. He says all their names out loud, one by one, in the car afterward with the windows up, like a prayer for people who don't pray. On quiet nights, he dreams he is standing on bare earth where a porch used to be, and wood creaks under his feet. He smells lemon cleaner and damp concrete that no longer exist. He hears a door open behind him, though there is no door, and a warm voice says, welcome. In the dream, he does not turn around. He keeps his eyes on the grass and says, no. He says it again and again until the voice goes away. He knows Lionel Greaves was a servant, not the source. Something older than Greaves lived in that house long before a wool cardigan warmed those steps. Maybe it lived in the ground. Maybe it lived in the idea of a door. It liked obedient children and polite smiles and the moment a small shoe crosses a sill. When Greaves died, it didn't. When the house came down, it shifted. A mouth can move. So Cal Maddox stands where the steps used to be and does the only thing he knows how to do. He watches the light. He watches the bowl. He watches the moment right before a child lifts a foot. And when he can, he says, wait, I'll go with you. He puts his hand out, and if a small hand takes it, he walks up the path together. He looks through the window at the neat little table and the generous pile of candy. He smiles back at the stranger behind the glass and says, she'll pick from here, and keeps one boot heel on the grass, one toe on the mat, never both feet over the line. He can't change the pattern on a map by himself, but he can keep one more child from crossing a threshold they won't come back from. He doesn't know if that matters in the long run. He only knows it matters that night. Sometimes the work is that small. Sometimes the job is just to stand where the world thins, speak softly, and be a better welcome than the one waiting on the other side. Milo Reyes had the graveyard shift at a tiny FM station in western Massachusetts. It wasn't fancy. The studio sat in a drafty old bungalow off a 2-lane road outside Greenfield. A dented soda machine rattled in the hall. Half the gear was older than Milo, but he loved the quiet hours. No playlists, no corporate emails, just him. A blinking on-air light and whoever was still awake at 2 a.m. Truckers on I-91, third-shift nurses in the hill towns, A few college kids up too late. On Halloween, he leaned into it. He'd spin horror soundtracks and take calls about local folklore. Ghost lights on forest roads. The witch tree out past Shelburne Falls. By 2:30 a.m., most of the phones were asleep. The board hummed. A low fog sat in the parking lot like spilled milk. A call came in. The line hissed hard, like water pouring over a mic. And something about the voice sounded wrong. Not a person shouting over bad reception, but a voice buried under it, as if the words had to swim through noise to reach him. "Can you play something for the little ones?" Ted asked. "Tell me the song," Milo said, hand on the fader. "Not a song," the caller said. "Tuned to the space between stations." The line cut. Dead. Milo cracked a joke to the few listeners left. Halloween brings out the strange, and let a track roll. During the ad break, he noticed the VU meters on the old analog board twitching. Inputs showed movement, but no channels were hot. He tapped each fader. Nothing. The needles still danced. He put on headphones and scanned the dial. Between 103.6 and 103.8 there was a sliver. 103.7 was their assigned frequency. At 103.65, where nothing in their market should exist, he found a signal. Children were singing, not a recording. There was breath in it. Little catches. The way real voices move when kids stand too close together. Maybe a dozen, maybe more, young, 5 to 10. The melody stepped wrong, like stairs out of order. The words weren't English. They weren't Spanish or French or anything Milo knew. It sounded older than any of that. He recorded 30 seconds and thought, perfect. Air a little clip as a spooky Halloween oddity, get a few texts, move on. Before he could cue it, another call came through. A woman this time, voice thin and urgent. "Don't put it on the air," she said. "If you carry them, they spread." "Who spreads?" Milo asked. "They aren't children," she said. "They're leftovers. Dead signal trying to learn how to be real again. My brother played them in 1991. WLPR outside Rockford. The station burned that night. 7 dead. The transmitter kept talking after the power failed. Please do not give them your antenna. The line went silent. Milo looked it up anyway. There it was, a late-night fire in 1991. No official cause. Some witness notes about screams over the speakers while the building burned. He swallowed. It could still be coincidence. He'd spun urban legends on air for years. Stories get sticky. He told himself he'd air only 10 seconds. A quick hear this weird thing we found, then back to music. He opened his mic, made a light comment about strange Halloween radio, and pressed play. The clip ran. Every phone in the building rang at once. The main request line lit up like a pinball machine. The hotline for the news desk rang. Milo's cell phone rang, though he kept it on silent. In the back office, an old rotary phone they'd never bothered to haul to the dump started jangling loudly on its dusty cradle. He picked up the studio line. Screaming bled through the speaker. Not a person hollering. It sounded wide, like a crowd caught in a vent. He hung up and answered his cell. Children laughing. The same laughter in the clip. He grabbed the back office phone, more out of reflex than anything. Someone breathed into his ear from very close to the mouthpiece. He killed the clip on the board. The song kept playing. He pulled every relevant fader to 0. It kept playing. He cut power to the board. It kept playing. Now routed through every open path in the room at once. The old turntable in the corner, unplugged for months, spun up. A cassette deck spit a tape, then reloaded it backward. LED meters slammed red and stuck there. The sound jammed itself through every speaker until the cones buzzed and rattled. Milo ran to the transmitter closet and threw the main breaker for the whole building. The studio went black. For 3 long seconds there was silence. Then the emergency generator coughed and started on its own. He had not touched the switch. The broadcast returned hotter than before, a wall of those small, wrong voices. Texts poured in. Phones stacked with unread messages. Said, "My radio turned on by itself and locked to 103.7. I can't change it." Another, "We're in Bennington and we never get your signal, but it's clear as day." Another, "My daughter woke up and started singing with them. She's 4. She doesn't speak like that." An unknown number left one more message. "This is Leland Pope, retired FCC engineering. What you aired wasn't a song. It's a door." In '54, an Army-funded lab did an experiment, codename Echo Lattice, broadcast a children's choir as they died in a hospital for science. Next day, every kid on the tape was dead and the audio wouldn't stop. It free ran looking for speakers. The commission buried it. We thought we sealed that frequency. You just cracked it. Milo searched government indexes on his phone. He found one fuzzy reference in an old hearing transcript. Echo Lattice Transmission Studies, 1954. Most of it redacted. That was enough to help the fear bloom. Tiny footsteps ran past the studio door. He froze. He was alone in the building. Still, the sound came. A light patter in the hall, 2 sets, then 4, then a dozen. Some skipping, some shuffling, all too small. He pulled up the security camera grid. In the grainy night filters, he saw shapes moving from room to room. Child-height shadows that were more whole than shape. They gathered outside the studio, just out of the camera's center. The knob turned. He had locked it. The lock held. The knob turned again like small hands testing it. In the glass of the door, he could see nothing. Then just the faintest suggestion of too many finger marks smearing in slow arcs. The voices changed. They stopped singing and started whispering. "Milo," dozens of little voices said. "Milo." The studio monitors flickered, filled with faces pressed too close to the lens. Children's faces that didn't sit right. Eyes too big for their heads. Mouths opened wider than human mouths open. Full of too many small teeth. Their lips moved in time to a song he couldn't hear through the monitors but could hear through the walls. He looked at the clock above the 2:47 a.m. He looked at his, what's 2:47? He looked at the phone. 2:47, none of it felt right. It felt like he'd been in the room for a day and a half. He gripped the microphone and did the only thing that made sense to a radio person. He identified himself. "This is WMHX Greenfield, Massachusetts," he said into the mess, voice shaking. "Licensed operator on frequency 103.7 megahertz. You're not authorized. Clear the channel." The chorus faltered, then rose, louder, higher, sharp enough to hurt. He flipped a small generator they used to make pink noise for testing and dumped it under their voices. For a breath, the broadcast stumbled. Boards popped. Sparks snapped out of a power strip and bit his wrist. He stayed with the ID, repeating the call sign like a spell. They came back harder. Now they used voices he knew. His ex-wife, his dead father, an old teacher. "Milo," those voices said, each one right in his ear the way they'd sounded in life. "Let us in." Just for a second. Just long enough to breathe. He did the worst thing an FM station can do. He put out nothing. He dropped everything to dead air and let silence sit on the frequency. For 3 minutes it held. Then the studio filled with that song again, full force, and somewhere under it he heard wires sizzle. He was out of tricks. He picked up a hammer from the engineering bench and smashed the recorder he'd used to capture the clip. Then the spare next to it. He cut cables and yanked patch cords. He poured the last inch of coffee into the board. A spark popped from the fader rail and climbed his hand in white pain. The main breaker tripped again, but this time the generator tried to start and failed. The building went dark for real. The quiet that followed wasn't normal quiet. It was deep, like sound had drained away and couldn't find the room again. He stood in it panting, waiting for the first whisper. Nothing came. After a minute, the emergency lights clicked on and washed everything red. The air smelled like burnt dust. When daylight finally got to the edges of the blackout curtains, the owner showed up. So did an FCC field agent from Boston and a local fire inspector with a clipboard. They walked the rooms. They wrote notes. They asked Milo what he had done and when. He played them the 30-second file. It was empty. He held up his phone to show the text messages. There were no messages between 2:32 a.m. and 3:10 a.m. on Halloween. Not from listeners, not from anybody. The old rotary phone had no line. The security monitors had recorded only static in the period he described. The only physical proof was a burned-out board, a tripped breaker, and a pile of shattered gear. The owner shut WMHX for repairs and then sold the license to a big company that automated the whole frequency a month later. The bungalow was condemned. Milo sent out resumes to stations and got polite rejections. A producer in Springfield told him flat, "Nobody wants the guy who burned down his own board." He took an IT support job at a medical office park and stopped saying "we" when he talked about radio. 3 years have passed. Milo has not set foot in a studio since. He keeps his phone on airplane mode every Halloween, but at 2:47 a.m. something still wakes. Speakers on his laptop hum even though they're muted. His phone vibrates with no notification. The car radio powers itself on, locked to 103.7, the dial frozen under his finger. Faint through the noise, he hears the children again. The same odd melody, the same not language. He has tried to record it. The files are always blank. He has tried to show friends. His friends hear nothing. He has found bits of other stories. 17 small stations closed after Halloween incidents between 1954 and now. Most of the overnight hosts died in fires or didn't show up the next day. A few just stopped talking and walked out and kept walking. Official records say equipment failure, suspected arson, no foul play. In the margins, you can still find a listener comment. Radios turned themselves on. Couldn't turn them off. Heard kids singing. Milo doesn't know what the experiment in 1954 actually did. He doesn't know where those voices live when nobody tunes them. He only knows that if a transmitter carries them long enough, they get louder. They figure out the room. They learn names. He still reaches for the dial sometimes. Habit is a strong thing. He catches himself scanning for that thin slice at 103.65. He pulls his hand away. He tells himself it wasn't his fault. He also knows he played them. He opened the door. Every year he sits up late on Halloween, not sleeping, not turning on anything that can broadcast. He waits through 2:47 in the dark. He repeats his old call letters in his head like a ward he no longer believes in. He tells himself that what he hears is just memory. He tells himself that next year will be quiet. Deep down, he believes something else. He believes that one night, somewhere, a young DJ who wants to make a good show will find the same little gap between stations. They'll think just 10 seconds. They'll hit play, and the voices that were children a lifetime ago will finally have a long enough wire to climb. He doesn't think the world is ready for what those voices have turned into in the space between frequencies. He's certain they've been practicing. Arlen Keefe was in his second year of a folklore PhD when his advisor, Dr. Maura Vance, nudged him toward an angle she said would set his work apart. Look for places where Halloween never got swallowed by plastic bats and supermarket candy. Find a town that still kept the old harvest rites alive, the kind that existed before parades and party store masks. She even had a lead from an archivist friend, Lantern Vale, population about 400, way out in the hills, settled by Scots-Irish families in the 1830s, and rumored to keep the old year's night the old way. Arlen had the right resume for it. He'd done a master's in anthropology, could read and speak Gaelic well enough to argue about verb endings, and had already published a small paper on how certain farm blessings survived inside church songs. The plan felt simple. He would arrive in early October, get permission, interview people, watch whatever they did on the 31st, and write the first proper study anyone had done on Lantern Vale. The town was 40 miles from the nearest 4-lane. His phone lost service 20 minutes before he got there. GPS died 10 miles out. He followed hand-painted boards nailed to trees. Vale. Then simply a lantern symbol pointing down a single-lane road that hugged the forest like a seam. When he finally rolled into a clearing, Lantern Vale looked like it had fallen out of time. There was a general store with a bell on the door, a one-room schoolhouse whose windows had been replaced, but frame and roof were original, and houses scattered along dirt spurs that disappeared into trees. The big thing was the square. In the middle stood a glass case on a cedar base, and inside it sat a pumpkin the size of a washtub with a placard. First light, 1839, kept whole. It should have been a puddle of rot after all those years. Instead, it looked not fresh exactly, but intact. The skin held its shape. The color was the deep, dull orange of old leather. Arlen stared long enough that a woman behind the boarding house desk cleared her throat to bring him back to the present. She took his money for a room and slid a key across the counter. As he signed the log, she said in a neutral voice that carried its own warning, "Folks keep to themselves here. Learning is fine. Interfering isn't. Outsiders usually finish up by September." "I'll be respectful," Arlen said. "My interest is October." Her mouth flattened and she said nothing else. Over the next week, he walked the roads, took notes, and tried to be invisible. Lantern motifs were everywhere, carved into door lintels, painted on mailboxes, tattooed small on forearms and ankles. At first he thought they were jack-o'-lantern faces, but the shapes didn't match anything he knew. Eyes too long, teeth too many, curves that looked like knotwork until you followed them, and realized a line doubled back on itself in a way no Celtic pattern did. He took photographs where people said it was okay. He drew the ones he wasn't allowed to shoot. He wrote down words people used: keeping, hollow, first light, old bargain. No one explained those words, and no one shut the door on him either. It wasn't friendly so much as watchful. A week in, the town council had a meeting. He was not invited. That night, after the door on the meeting hall closed and the lamps inside went dark, a woman knocked on his room door at the boarding house. She introduced herself as Lina Doss, council chair. She was in her 50s, steady eyes, calm voice. "We voted," she said. "You can watch the keeping on the 31st. From the platform, you will not speak, you will not leave the marked place. You will destroy every picture you make before you leave the valley. If you do not agree, you will go tomorrow." She handed him a paper to sign. It looked like a waiver. It also had a paragraph about non-material harms and bindings, and a line that said, in plain English, any spiritual consequences would be his to bear. Arlen read it all the way through, then signed. The work mattered. This was what he had asked for. People relaxed a little after that. He ate supper with a family whose garden could have supplied a restaurant. They talked about soil and rain and moon phases. A man named Emery showed him a shed full of drying vine and seed, explaining which pumpkins were for pies, which were for the square, and which were for the middle. No one explained the middle. Lina let Arlen in the hall basement one afternoon. It wasn't a real archive, but there were boxes you had to treat like one. Journals with oil-darkened covers, lists of names on blue paper, a ledger bound with cloth tape. The earliest notes were from 1839. The entries talked about bringing over the ways and setting a hinge in the new place so the harvest would know us. A short line in an old hand said, "Seven opened the ground first, that the earth would learn our voices." Later pages were more practical. Who built fences? Whose hay came in late? Who married whom? But every October there were entries about keeping, about a hollowing, about the first light being fed. A box from 1958 held photocopies of state papers, a half-finished investigation into missing children in a neighboring county. The report ended mid-sentence. Arlen stuck a note on the file to ask Lina about it. He didn't bring it up at dinner. He told himself the old lines about seven were folklore, a story attached to real events to give them shape. People meant baptisms or initiations. He told himself that right up to the afternoon of October 31st. The whole town turned itself toward the square. Arlen saw men roll out pumpkins that would need 3 people to lift. He saw women carve and paint and burn marks into thick skin with patience and skill. The faces weren't faces. They were patterns. He recognized parts of old alphabets, Ogham strokes, Gaelic words twisted into something else. A spiral that wanted to be a Triskelion but wasn't. The pumpkins went into circles, big ones in an outer ring, medium ones inside that. 7 giants in the center around the glass case. When they opened the case, the old pumpkin released a smell like cellars and wet leaves. The skin still held, but the air around it felt wrong, as if it were breathing. Arlen was told to climb a small platform at the edge of the square. It had a railing and a yellow line painted at his feet. "Say nothing," Lina said. "Stay put." He nodded and clutched his notebook. His camera hung around his neck, and even then, he knew he shouldn't use it. He took it anyway. At dusk, the elder came out. Arlen had seen him across a road before, never up close. Up close, he looked. Not ageless, just worn in a way that made age the wrong word. He began to chant. The words brushed Gaelic but didn't sit in it. The crowd answered in a low pulse that kept time with a drum Arlen couldn't see. 7 children walked into the inner ring. They were maybe 6 to 10, faces painted orange with pulp streaks. Arlen leaned toward Lina, who was suddenly near his platform, though he hadn't seen her walk over. "Who are they?" he asked before he realized he was breaking Rule 1. "The chosen," she said softly, "for keeping. Their families are proud." His stomach dropped. He opened his mouth and then closed it again. Curiosity told him to keep watching. Everything else in him told him to leave. He held the rail with both hands instead. The 7 were led to the giants. Someone had cut those pumpkins open with great care and cleaned them out until the insides shone. Each child climbed into one and sat. Lids went on. The chant rose. The pumpkins swelled and shrank in time to the drums. Their skin moved, not vibration, breathing. Vines pushed out of the earth around the circle like green ropes. They coiled and held. Someone passed the elder a clay jug. He poured a dark liquid over each carved mouth. The smell hit Arlen so hard his eyes watered. Blood and something sour with age. That was when the pumpkins began to sink, not roll. Sink. The packed dirt beneath them looked solid, then softened like a pond in rain. The 7 giants went down by inches. The children started to scream. The sound came clear through the carved mouths, then muffled, then gone as the lid sank level with the ground and the earth lay smooth again as if nothing had been there. The chanting did not stop. It grew softer and steadier. Arlen stepped across the painted line without thinking. 2 men took him gently by the arms and set him back where he belonged. He didn't fight them. A long half-hour later, the ground in the center moved again. 7 shapes pushed up. Dirt broke along the lines where the giants had been. New pumpkins, smaller, tight-skinned, split from the inside. 7 figures stood. They had children's bodies and clean clothes. Where their faces should have been, there was carved pumpkin. Not a mask laid over skin. Flesh cut like rind. Shining orange light from behind eye slits and a hooked nose and a mouth full of too many square teeth. The town bowed. The 7 walked among the people one by one. They laid warm orange hands on foreheads. Wherever they touched, grown men cried. Women laughed and wept at the same time. Someone started humming in the same off-Gaelic Arlen had heard in the elders' chant. It ran through the square like a wind. Lina came to the platform again. "You asked," she said without judgment. "You see now. It's the hollowing. They lend their faces for one night so the old one can walk with us. By dawn, the faces are theirs again. The old one keeps the fields. It's a good trade." Arlen shook his head. Not because he wanted to argue, but because the words wouldn't go anywhere in him. He didn't know what to call what he had seen. He lifted his camera as much out of the need to do something as any decision to record it. The elder climbed the platform steps. He rested a hand on the rail inches from Arlen's. His palm left a faint smear of pumpkin pulp. "When you stare at a hinge, you become part of it," he said. "You signed for consequences. You will keep your word." 2 people Arlen hadn't noticed before took him by the elbows again. They did not hurt him. They walked him to the center. He knelt without being asked, because everyone else around him had gone still. And stillness felt like the only safe thing left. The preserved pumpkin watched him from the glass case. One of the 7 touched his cheek. Heat flared so bright he thought his hair would catch. He opened his mouth and no sound came. Fingers moved across his skin in clean lines. He felt cuts being drawn but not cut. His face filled with the shape of eyes and a nose and a mouth that didn't belong to him. The blood that followed ran warm down his chin into a bowl. Someone carried the bowl to the old pumpkin and poured. Light rose inside the old thing, a dull lantern glow that went out again as if it had eaten well. "You're marked," Lina said by his ear. "Harvest marked. You won't be robbed of your face. We don't do that to guests, but you agreed not to carry our night out of our place. When you try, the mark will remember you and make you quiet." He woke in his bed at first light with bandages on his cheeks and chin. He did not remember the walk back. When he splashed water, the blood on the cloth was his own. He walked to the square on shaky legs. There were no circles, no trampled ground. The glass case sat on its cedar plinth with the old pumpkin inside. 7 children played tag between the benches. They had freckles and missing teeth and stick-on tattoos of black cats. Arlen asked a simple question. "Do you remember last night?" They looked at him like he'd made a bad joke. "Trick or treat?" One of them said. "We got the big bars." Then they ran to the corner of the square where someone had set up a table with cocoa. He checked his camera. Every picture from after sunset was black. His notebook pages from the same hours were full. He had written. Only the words were not his, or they were his in a script he could sound out but not translate. The letters moved when he tried to stare. Arlen packed without saying goodbye. By the time he reached the highway, the cuts on his face had closed. By the time he reached campus, the skin showed nothing you could point to. He sat across from Dr. Vance and tried to tell her what he had seen. When he got to 7, his face lit the way it had under that orange hand, and a burn crawled along the lines where the child had traced the eyes and nose and mouth. His voice quit. He tried to write it instead. His hand cramped at the second sentence and wouldn't uncurl. He tried an audio recorder. His voice came out warped, slow and wet. Then the device clicked and died. He changed topics. He filed a new proposal about house-to-house blessings in dairy counties and finished the degree on time. He did not say Lantern Vale out loud again. He did not look it up on maps because the maps never turned up anything anyway. Every October 31st, at the moment the sun falls behind the hills, his face warms. The lines shine faintly in any window that will throw back a true reflection. Not bright enough for anyone else to see, just enough for him to know. He smells rotten sweet pulp. He hears 7 young voices sing in that thin, skewed language. By morning on November 1st, he looks as he always does. He is 43 now. 17 years have passed. He has never gone back. He has not found any other scholar bold or foolish enough to say they have. Still, sometimes close to midnight on Halloween, when the air feels heavy and the street outside his apartment goes quiet, he wonders how many people in how many places carry the same hidden cut. How many signed papers they didn't understand because the work mattered and they wanted to see. He wonders how many towns like Lantern Vale are folded into the country, small, careful, and faithful to bargains no one else remembers. He also knows this: things that are fed do not fade. They take the food and get stronger. One night in some year to come, the keeping in Lantern Vale will want more. 7 won't be enough. When that night comes, he will feel it like a hand on his cheek, hot and gentle. It will pull him out of whatever life he has made. Because when the old one marks you, you stay part of the field. You may leave the valley. You may stop saying the words. You can't unplant yourself. The harvest always finishes what it begins. Dr. Tamsin Ward had been a clinical psychologist for 19 years. She ran a small practice on the 4th floor of a plain brick building near the river. Most of her work was trauma and grief. Veterans, widowers, accident survivors. She believed in the brain, in habits and chemistry and treatment plans. She didn't believe in curses. If a client said curse, she heard panic and pattern seeking and started mapping out CBT. On October 27, 2018, her receptionist took a call from a man who said his name was Colin Harrow. He begged for the latest possible appointment on Halloween, after dark, if she'd allow it. The only slot left was 7:30 p.m., Wednesday, October 31st. He took it. His voice sounded rubbed raw, like he hadn't slept. Colin showed up right on time. Early 40s, good coat that needed pressing, tie a little off, purple shadows under his eyes. He shook Tamsin's hand, sat, looked at the rug, then asked in a careful voice, "Do you treat people who think they're cursed?" "I treat people who feel cursed," Tamsin said. "That feeling comes from very real things, trauma, anxiety, obsessive thinking. Those are treatable." He nodded once, as if he'd known she would say that, and started from the beginning. 3 years earlier, Halloween 2015, he'd been at a friend's party in an old house on the edge of town. The host collected oddities and loved a theme. That year it was Victorian spiritualism. There were velvet table runners, heavy drapes, a talking board laid out for show, and a tall mirror propped against the mantel. Black wooden frame carved with leaves and eyes, about as high as Colin's chest. The host told a story over mulled wine. The mirror had belonged to a woman named Lydia Hale, who worked as a medium in 1879. People paid to weep in front of the glass and see their dead. The host said Lydia stopped using it after something looked back at a client that wasn't her husband. Colin had laughed at that. So did everyone else. Later, tipsy and egged on, he stood in front of the mirror. He stared at himself for a long beat. His reflection stared back. Then the face in the glass smiled. His actual face didn't. He put a hand to his mouth. The man in the mirror didn't. He stepped away. Everyone said it was the wine. Since then, Colin said, I keep catching my reflection. Wrong. Tamsin asked the usual medical questions and recommended a neurologist. Migraines can bend vision, seizure auras can play tricks. An MRI rules out the serious stuff. He slid a folder across her coffee table. MRI, CT, labs. A clean letter from a neurologist, another from an ophthalmologist. All normal. He explained how it escalated. At first it was a half-second lag. Then he'd pass a store window, and his double would glance a fraction to the left while he looked right. Then the double started showing up where it had no reason to be. Stainless steel kettle, black phone screen, a quiet puddle in the driveway after rain. The version of him in those surfaces was thinner, washed out, with eyes that were too dark as though pupils had swallowed the irises. Sometimes it grinned a little too wide like a mask. And lately, he said, it tries to talk. I can't hear it. I can read the shape of words. What words? She asked. He stared at his hands. Soon. Tamsin kept her voice calm and practical. Dissociation does strange things. Depersonalization can feel exactly like that. Like the person in the glass isn't you. We can work with that. Colin pulled out his phone. He opened the camera, turned it to selfie mode, just to show his face. He looked like any tired man. Then he angled the phone so the camera picked up his outline, reflected in Tamsin's office window. In the window, the double's mouth was curling up. The eyes looked wrong. The man in the chair didn't move a muscle. Tamsin took the phone, checked the lens, toggled the camera, tried the angle herself. In her own reflection, everything looked normal. When she shifted so the window showed Colin, the smile returned in the glass. When she looked back to him in the room, neutral. Back to the window, wrong again. Light artifact, she said automatically, even as she felt her pulse pick up. They tried a second room with a big wall mirror near the waiting chairs. Colin stood beside her. In the mirror, Tamsin saw herself exactly as she felt. Tired, professional, hair escaping its clip. Beside her, in glass, Colin's double lifted a hand and waved. Colin's real hand didn't move. Raise your hand, she told him. He did. The mirror hand dropped. The double in the mirror turned its head and looked right at Tamsin, as if the real Colin wasn't there. The mouth formed a single word. She didn't need sound to read it. Soon, Tamsin stepped back. Her skepticism didn't break all at once. It bent. Optics could account for a lot, so could suggestion and fear. But the simple facts, what she had just seen with her own eyes, sat in the room with them like a third person. Colin kept going. On Sunday morning, October 28th, he'd woken in his bed, eyes open, body heavy and unmoving. Sleep paralysis wasn't new to Tamsin. She'd heard it 100 times. He stared at the ceiling, telling himself to breathe through it. And then the cupboard mirror across from the bed showed him something he couldn't name. Himself in the reflection, sitting up. The reflected Colin swung his legs to the floor, stretched, walked past the bed, and stood at the mirror inches from Colin's trapped gaze. The reflected version put a finger to the glass and laughed without sound. 10 minutes later, when Colin managed to jerk one hand, the double did exactly what the real world demanded and lay back down in sync. I know how this sounds, he said, almost apologizing. I know, but I can feel it learning. Halloween is the only date that ever matters for it. It's gotten worse every October. If I give it a surface, it has a door. What are you going to do? Tamsin asked. Go home, he said. Tonight I taped brown paper over the windows. I took down every mirror. I put towels over the faucets and covered the microwave door and the TV. I'm going to sit in a pantry with no phone and wait for sunrise on November 1st. Tamsin offered hospital admission for safety, or a colleague for a second opinion, or even to call his brother to stay the night. He shook his head at each one. People tried to help, he said. Priests, a paranormal group, a physicist with a blog. Everyone said a version of the same thing. If it tagged you, it knows your face now. The only thing I can do is not give it glass. He stood to go. At the door, he paused. Don't look at mirrors on Halloween, he said. He seemed embarrassed to say it. I mean it, Dr. Ward. Don't let it notice you. After he left, Tamsin sat with the mirror room door open and the lights too bright. She told herself a story she could live with. Her brain had been primed. He'd been persuasive. The window was old. The camera had a delay. She wrote the words optical test, underlined twice, and shared misperception. She looked things up. Troxler's fading, Caputo's mirror-gazing illusion. The way faces morph when you stare too long. There are answers for everything if you zoom in close enough. At 11:47 p.m., her phone buzzed. She startled and laughed at herself. Time to go. She locked her file cabinet, reached for her coat, and saw movement in the window glass. Her reflection already had the coat on. Her hands were still on the chair back. The woman in the window adjusted the cuff, picked up the briefcase, walked toward the door. Tamsin did not move. In the glass, the office door opened. The other Tamsin paused and looked straight at her. The smile was small and private, like a joke between old friends. Then the reflected door shut, and the window showed an empty room. Tamsin couldn't get her arms to lift. She stood very still and listened to the clock in the hall. She raised one hand slow. The window showed the dark street behind her and faintly her desk, but not her. No outline, no smudge where her body should have blocked the reflected lamplight. Her phone ticked to midnight. November 1st. She drove home without glancing in the rear view. She put her phone face down on the entry table. In the bathroom, she flipped the switch off and brushed her teeth by feel. When she finished, she reached out of old habit for the small square mirror in the cabinet door. She stopped her hand inches from the handle and left the room instead. The next morning, she called a contractor. By afternoon, the mirrors were off the walls. The TV stowed in a closet. The glossy desk protector rolled up and stuffed behind a bookcase. She bought matte screen protectors for her phone and laptop, and kept the brightness so low she could barely make out text. In the office, she shifted her chair so the window was always behind her shoulder. She told her receptionist that the lamps would stay on in the waiting room during evening appointments now. No more night glass unless necessary. When she had to pass a shop window, she fixed her gaze on the sidewalk and counted cracks. When a car door threw back a quick silver version of her face, she turned her head. She didn't shave with a mirror. She didn't check her hair in a cafe spoon. She learned the shape of her features by touch the way someone learns a new city, by walking it in fog. Sometimes, against all her rules, movement snagged her eye in a black laptop screen. She'd glance without meaning to, and catch half of a living room behind her that wasn't hers. Sometimes at night, the blank rectangle of her dark window showed a hallway lamp that didn't exist in her house, once in the chrome of a faucet she hadn't covered yet. She saw the corner of her own office and a coat draped over a chair, hers in the mirror world. Leaving at 11:47, gone to somewhere else. She did not hear from Colin on November 1st. She called once and got his voicemail. She didn't leave a message. The restraint hurt. On November 3rd, a parcel showed up at her office with no return address. Inside was a short note in blocky handwriting. Sun rose. I'm still here. Below that, a single sentence. I taped everything and sat in the dark, and it paced on the other side of the cupboard door until 12:06. A second sheet held a list of things he'd missed. A stray puddle in the shower tile grout. A glossy black knob on the stove, his own eye in the peephole. At the bottom, he had added, "Next year I'll start earlier." Tamsin folded the paper in half and put it in a plain manila folder with no label. She didn't tell anyone about the appointment. When clients came in around the holidays and talked about seeing the faces of their dead in ornaments, she talked about grief and projection and the brain's hunger for meaning, because all of that is true. She also set a box of tissues within reach and angled the chrome lamp base so it didn't show anything but light. Every year since 2018, on October 31st, she leaves her office before dusk. She unplugs her computer, covers her bathroom sink with a hand towel, drapes a dishcloth over the kettle. She puts a piece of masking tape across her phone camera. It looks ridiculous. She does it anyway. Around midnight, there is always some kind of test. The blank TV screen will catch a ghost of movement that doesn't belong to the room. The dark window will show a doorway that isn't hers. Sometimes she feels a tug in her chest to look, the way people feel a tug to lean over a railing. That's when she thinks of a tired man in a pantry with paper over the windows, awake and waiting. And she looks at the floor instead and counts her breaths. On November 1st, she lets the lamps make long, warm ovals on the walls. She wipes the tape residue off her phone. She lets herself believe for one day that she has outlasted it again. She still doesn't believe in curses. She believes in survival. She believes that ignoring a mirror is, in some cases, good medicine. And when a client sits on her couch and says, "I know how this sounds, but my reflection," She doesn't interrupt. She listens until the story is empty, and then she says, "What would help you get through tonight?" And doesn't let them leave without a plan. Rhea and Daniel Harper had been on Larkspur Court for 8 Halloweens. It was a cul-de-sac of chalk hopscotch and lawn chairs, the kind of place where someone always had a spare roll of tape for a costume wing that fell off. Rhea went overboard every October. Paper bats on the windows, 4 carved pumpkins, a string of soft orange bulbs around the porch, and a big bowl of full-size bars that made them local legends. At 6:31 p.m., the bell chimed. Daniel opened the door and found a boy standing alone. 10, maybe. Black suit painted with bones that glowed faintly. An old thin plastic mask pushed up on his head like a headband. He held out a pumpkin pail without speaking. "Looking sharp," Daniel said, dropping in a bar. "No thank you." No giggle. The kid pivoted and stepped off the porch as quietly as if he weighed nothing. Daniel watched him fade into the seam of shade between 2 street lamps and felt a tiny drop in his stomach he couldn't name. Who was it? Rhea called from the kitchen. "Skeleton kid," he said. Super quiet. She checked the neighborhood chat list. Plenty of children on their street, but none that age. Their 2, Zara, 8, and Kabir, 9, were on the sidewalk with glow bracelets and friends. Borrowed neighborhood, she decided. He'll be with someone. At 7:14, the bell again. Same boy, same posture. Bucket held like a scale waiting for a weight. Daniel cracked a joke about déjà vu. The boy didn't blink. Another bar went in. Off he went by 7:56, round 3. "Hey, didn't we?" Daniel began. The boy's eyes were wrong in a way he couldn't put into words. Too deep, like all the light in the porch fixture skipped them. Daniel handed over candy to make the moment end. At 8:32, the bell chimed a quick double. Daniel didn't open. Through the side light, he watched the boy stand absolutely still, as if he'd been set there by careful hands. 5 minutes. Then the boy stepped down and slid into that same wedge of shadow again. "You're winding yourself up," Rhea said, amused. "Next one's mine." At 9:06, the bell. Rhea pulled open the door, smiled wide, and said, "Happy Halloween." She placed a bar into the pail. "You've been busy," she said. "How's the route?" The boy's voice came out thin and far away, like air leaking from a tire. "I have to finish. I live here," Rhea's smile faltered. "Here in this house?" The boy pointed past her shoulder into the foyer. "Yes." They shut the door gently and stood in the hall with their heartbeats a little too loud. Daniel hopped onto the county site on his phone, then called the previous owners, the Ellisons, now at a retirement complex. "Was there ever," he began, then tried again. "Any accidents before you bought?" "Around Halloween?" A beat of silence. "Not with us," Mrs. Ellison said. "Before us, late 70s. A little boy. We never got details. Folks didn't talk about such things back then." Rhea combed public records. There it was in crisp black type. Column Rourke 10, deceased 10/31/1976. Pedestrian struck by vehicle. Residence 18 Larkspur Court. A grainy photo from an old paper showed a narrow-faced kid in a skeleton getup. Shy smile, hair parted too neatly. At 9:44 p.m., the bell began to stutter. Quick presses one after another, as if small impatient fingers were learning the timing. Daniel opened. The boy stood on the mat. Up close, that chalky pallor wasn't makeup at all. It was as if someone had thinned him with water. Through his shoulder, Daniel could see the brass edge of the umbrella stand. He slid the deadbolt and pressed his eye to the peephole. The boy's face hovered inches away. No breath fogged the glass. Rhea dialed the non-emergency line. "A child keeps returning to our door and won't speak," she told the dispatcher, keeping the stranger part to herself. A cruiser rolled by at 10:12. The officer swept the yard with a flashlight and shrugged. No footprints in the wet mulch. No kid. As the cruiser's taillights vanished, the bell rang again. Zara's small voice drifted down the stairs. "Mom?" A boy was looking in my window. They hurried to her room. Daniel raised the blind. In the yard, the skeleton boy stood with his face tipped up toward the glass, as if he were listening for something inside the house. Daniel pushed out the back door. Cold air, empty grass. When he returned to the front, the bell chimed once. The boy waited, patient as a clock. Kabir cleared his throat. "I saw him earlier," he admitted, eyes sliding away. I thought he was in our grade. I let him inside. He stood there, he pointed to the front hall, and said this was his house and my room used to be his. The Ellisons had left them a framed blueprint from 1967. Daniel took it down and looked. Back then, the upstairs had been one long room on the right. Their remodel had split it into Zara and Kabir's spaces. The larger half, the one with Zara's window, would have been columns. Rhea stepped onto the porch and sat on the top step. She didn't raise her voice. "Column," she said, the bucket lowered. The boy's next words, when they came, sounded suddenly ordinary. "I didn't finish," he said. "I have to show my mom and dad what I got. I was coming back. The car didn't see." "It's been a long time," Rhea said. "They don't live here anymore." He shook his head, small and stubborn. "I'm still trick-or-treating." He rattled the bucket. Inside, Rhea glimpsed wrappers from another era. Marathon bars with braided caramel on the label, a Bonkers logo, wacky wafers, all faded to soft, wrong colors. The chocolate had fossilized into lumpy pebbles. Daniel's answer arrived in his mouth like a thing he'd been carrying for years. "Let us be the ones waiting," he said. "For tonight, we can be the grown-ups at the end of your route. Come in and show us." The boy hesitated the way kids do when they've been told not to go into strangers' houses. Then he stepped over the threshold without a sound. He stood very still in the entry, like he was comparing what he saw with what he remembered. The paint was different, the banister newer, but the angles matched. In the living room, he turned his pail over. Ancient candy slid onto the coffee table in a whisper of dry paper. The logos were ghosts. Some wrappers dissolved into confetti bits just from landing. Daniel did what any dad does, because that's what the moment needed. "Look at all that," he said, low and cheerful. "You crushed it." Rhea picked up a wrapper between two fingers, paper thin as onion skin, and laid it down before it cracked. "Tell us where you hit," she said. Colum told them about strollers on corners that no longer had stop signs, about Mrs. Flynn who gave out hot cider, and Mr. Novak, who always scowled but put 2 bars in your sack if your costume pleased him. He named streets that had been renamed, friends who would now be middle-aged. As he talked, his voice seemed to come from farther away. The edges of him frayed like breath on cold glass. The painted bones dimmed until they looked sketched. "You did good," Rhea said softly. "It's late, sweetheart. Bedtime." He nodded as if that line was a piece of muscle memory. "Can I have one more Snickers first?" Rhea placed a new bar from the bowl into his hand. He smiled, a quick bright thing that was only 10 years old and nothing else. "Thank you," he said. "I love you." He turned toward the stairs. Each step took a little more of him. Halfway to the landing, he was light in air and outline. By the top, there was nothing to see. On the coffee table, the pile remained. Daniel snapped a picture, then tapped a marathon wrapper. It fell into gray powder. By morning, the heap had softened into a thin veil of dust. When he wiped it with a damp cloth, the smear left a faint, sugary scent and then nothing. The following day, Daniel called the Historical Society. The volunteer didn't need prompting. In 1976, on Halloween night, a car turned off Maple and onto Larkspur without headlights. A 10-year-old ran ahead of his friends. The driver never saw him. The boy's parents arrived before the ambulance, and the whole block went quiet for months. The family moved the next spring. The parents were gone now, buried in town. Rhea and Daniel drove to the cemetery that weekend. Column's stone was small, grass tight around it. Colum Rourke, 1966-1976, beloved son. Rhea set a full-size Snickers on the clean granite. "So you don't have to scrounge the old ones," she said. A sunbeam lit the gold wrapper. A week later, the wrapper was gone. No torn plastic caught under the stone. No ant trails. Just simple absence. 5 Halloweens have passed since then. The porch light still clicks on at dusk. Kids still flood the steps. There's no bell that rings 15 times in a row anymore. No pale face at the window. Nothing presses its small shadow against the glass. Still, when the last pillowcase of candy has gone home, and there too are asleep with chocolate breath, Rhea leaves a single Snickers bar on the porch rail and whispers, "Night, Colum." At dawn, there's only the faintest rectangle of dust where the candy sat. They explain it away for the kids. Raccoons, probably. Or a teenager on a dare. They say it with straight faces because good parents pick the story that lets their children sleep. But when the dishes are stacked and the house goes quiet, and it's just the two of them standing in that familiar hall. They don't bother pretending to each other. A boy who never made it back to his front door finally got to finish his route. He found people who stood still and said, "Show us. We're glad you came. You can rest now." Once a year, maybe on his way to wherever unfinished things finally end, he stops by without ringing. He knows something sweet will be waiting. He knows somebody inside remembers his name. If there's any fairness left in the world, that's enough.